Kshetra Dharmasthala Rural Development Project. That is SKDRDP. So we are working in 16 districts of Karnataka with 2.25 lakh SHGs and 22 lakh of families. So our main activity is microfinance. So total turnover of SKDRDP with the SHGs is about 6,000 crores. Then total outstanding is about 2,000 crores now. So, but as far as government program, implementation of government program is concerned, we have implemented about 25 programs. That means we have worked with the 25 departments of Government of India, Government of Karnataka and local Panchayat Raj institutions. So major activity we have implemented is Special SGSY program of Government of India. So we have submitted one project worth rupees 15 crores. So that after implementing that program, we could give employment, direct employment for 4,000 women, rural women in Dakshina Kannada. And we have established one Section 25 company that is called Siri to market the goods produced by those SHG members. So regarding that other aspects, regarding difficulties and all, we can have a discussion. But we had a very good experience in implementing that program. Then major other activities, rural sanitation with the Jilla Panchayats and FoodSem, that is Karnataka Urban Development and Coastal Environment Program. It is in 5 urban areas. So we have constructed about 12,000 individual toilets in urban areas. And even in rural part of Dakshina Kannada, Jilla Panchayat assigned us to build awareness and for the construction of rural toilets. And we got support from CAPART also for that program in some other areas. And even some other major programs only I will refer here, otherwise the time will up. And there is agriculture extension program. Initially we have implemented it. It helped us to develop farmers groups. That is Pragati Bandhu. It is an exclusive program of Sri Kshetra Dharmasthala Rural Development Project. So that agriculture extension program helped us in this regard. Then Devaraja's Devaraja's Backward Class Development Corporation, DBCDC. They gave us a loan component to help economically backward class to take up self-employment program. So it's also a very good program as I feel. Then FoodSem, again I have referred that we have also formed about 10,000 SHGs in urban areas with the help of this FoodSem. Then with NABARD grant and loan support, we have implemented that SREE program, that is System of Rice Intensification. So more than 40,000 farmers, we have trained them and they cultivated the system in their land and they got benefited. Then recently we are implementing WSHG program. It is this is financed from Ministry of Finance and NABARD. So we already, total target is forming 9,500 SHGs in Chitradurga, and we have already within 8 months we have formed 4,500 SHGs, and it is through bank. It is the lead bank is Canara Bank there. So already crores is lent to that those SHGs to take up the livelihood and other activities. Then we have worked with the no. I will brief some only major activity I will inform. Then BC model. It is with bank, but it is a commercial bank, but it is a department of government only. It is from government only. So we are BCs for SHGs. The general individual BC is quite common, I think, but for SHGs, we are first BCs, as I know, as my knowledge goes. So under BC model, we are having some 90,000 SHGs in some 10 districts. It is majorly northern part. We are working with SBI, Canara Bank, Union Bank, and Corporation Bank. So in brief, again we have worked with some other organization, major organization, but I will stop my
First, I thought my learning is while working in government projects. First, you have to build a relationship with all the stakeholders. Where we are going to fail, first we have to do that relationship building with all the stakeholders from top to bottom, like farmers, or we call beneficiaries, or maybe the block unit or district unit, or maybe state unit. And next, we have to share what we are doing with all the stakeholders. That oftenly we fail. We have to share what we are going to do or what we are doing with the stakeholders. We will share with our friends or colleagues or in the office within our organization, but we are oftenly fail to share with all the stakeholders, like taluk units or block units or from the to district units or state units. Like that, we will have a fear what they will go into, what will be the reaction. My achievement is less, or we are not doing correct. They will be thrown from out of the office, like that. And sharing is not, in that sense, we should not wait for the invitation for sharing. Oftenly, we have to go and share with them. And we have to build a relationship with all the beneficiaries first. And first one is we have to maintain that we should be very honest what we are doing and what we are going to do it, and what are our, and also in sharing of our achievements. We should not share over achievements or like that. If your target is 100, if you achieved 10, you should share with the only 10 figures. You should not share with the 19 or 100 we are achieved. Be honest. And if you achieve less also, be honest. And second one is we should have some patience in working with government programs. Somebody may be not listening to you, somebody may be, they may be scolding, and somebody may be not giving support to your program. We should be patient and we should be wait for that, this thing. And we should link all the departments, or I can say it, we should link, rapport with all the departments, like PRIs, banks, whatever it may be. It may be directly involving or indirectly involving. You have to build a rapport, or you have to link the departments. Banks, it may be banks, it may be PRIs, it may be local schools, like that. And also, we should have a sharing with them, and a frequent meeting we should organize with all the stakeholders. Then maybe all the people may be not support to you, but if you are honest and if you share with them, some of the other members will back up you. This is my experience.
So, as I said, we worked primarily on livelihoods, rural livelihoods, and across sectors, from starting with natural resource management to, you can classify forest-based, because this is a forest-intense area, so forest-based livelihoods, livestock-based, and farm-based and non-farm-based. So all the whole array of livelihoods, one can say, we work with. Primarily also because we haven't gone with a particular formula that we're going to promote this or that, which we do in these areas. There are technologies and there are ideas that we have evolved. So we do go with preset ideas into villages in many cases, but that is one part of the approach. But our predominant approach is that we go into the community with an open mind and look at what the community is involved in. And most of them are small and marginal farmers. 80 to 85% of our families that we work with are farmers. So farming becomes the predominant activity that we are also involved in. And then around farming, then we try to build other sectors. So we try to strengthen what they're already doing as farming, and then additional to what they are doing. And if you can actually, the characteristic of the natural resources in this area is that if we can invest, financial resources into developing these natural resources, land and water, then the productivities and the production can really be enhanced to very much higher order. So the family can really be not wealthy, but at least better, much better off from the farms itself they hold, and from the forest resources they already have. So trying to rejuvenate the existing sources of livelihoods and then create other augmented sources. So that has been our approach, and with 300,000 families, out of which about 200,000 have been linked with sustainable livelihood, one or the other sustainable livelihood program. And talking about scale up and partnering with the state, I think since the last 25 years at least, or almost 30 years, all the major government programs that would have happened in these states as well as across the country, we would have partnered with. So starting with IRDP, I can actually list out in my mind, starting with IRDP, which was one of the initial largest program on rural livelihoods which the government had set out. From starting with IRDP today to NRLM, so we have been partnering in actually implementing livelihood programs with each of these programs. In between came the self-help group program, the watershed development programs, the sectoral, and the self-help group promotion programs, and you name it, and it was there. That is at the national level, and in the states you had the poverty initiatives of the World Bank, the DPIP, the rural livelihood programs from multiple multilateral agencies. So there are, in each of the states have their own specific livelihood programs as well, funded by the multilateral or the bilateral funding, and the national government also had many livelihood programs. And I think, as I can see in my mind, Pradhan has partnered with all of them. So, and that is also the reason why we have been able to, we were able to reach out to more numbers. So 300,000 maybe the family we work today, but there are maybe a good number who also has graduated from our programs and gone out of Pradhan's program. So we've, in a sense, collectively worked with a very large number of families, but predominantly through collaboration and partnering very closely with the government. Therefore, as Ved said in the opening, that we are for working with the government. So Pradhan has always been an organization, and I'm sure most of the NGOs are, that we do believe that state is the organization to partner with. But primarily because it is the largest development agency in the country today. It commands the largest quantum of resources with it, and it is also the most legitimate leader of development in the country. Therefore, partnering with the government is the way to go ahead. And if we can really crack how to do that, and that is something we have been trying for years and years, we still haven't cracked it. But if there's some way of cracking that collaboration with the government and collaborating with the state, I think there is no looking back. We can really reach out to very, very large numbers. So therefore, and as experiences go, we have had good experiences and had bad experiences. I think that we could take up when the time again comes. As Manjunath also said, we asked to get out of the office to, very welcoming to the office. All the varieties we have faced across our tenure in working with the government. In most places, they are very welcoming. So what are, just top of the mind, what could have been the various reasons why Pradhan could have been invited by the government to partner with? That's question which Ved was asking. One is, I think we believe that we need to partner. So that is, I think, very important. If you're going to partner with someone else, we need to have that belief, basic belief in you at least. I don't know about the partner. I don't know what the state thinks of us, but at least we think that we need to partner with the state. So we approach that with the objective to partner. So it is not, we don't look at it in the short term that, one meeting we went and we were asked to get out. It's not the person who is asking to, that person has asked you to get out, but the system is still there. So you have to continually work with the system. That collector will come and the collector will go, or that block development officer will be there and tomorrow there will be somebody else there. But you need to continuously cultivate the system to build that long-term relationship to actually evolve meaningful partnerships. So that I think, that belief that we need to do it and do it long-term, that could be one of the reasons why we were successful in doing it. Second, I think the partner also looks in you as what is the unique thing that you have to offer. What is that you offer which is not there somewhere else. Is there a specific technology, a specific innovation, a specific way of working with the community, a specific way of organizing the whole thing? So what is that uniqueness that you bring in? That also is very important. So, if you, so therefore, constantly as a civil society organization, as an NGO working on the community, you're also constantly innovating the models, the technologies and the whatever one is doing, that we have to constantly innovate and then convert that into some kind of scalable prototypes. That is, I think, very important, because, when you talk to the state, when you sit in the government, talk to somebody sitting on the government side, they're looking for very fast movement. And fast movement can only happen if there is some scalable prototype they're able to create. And the prototype needs to have both the social as well as the technical. It's actually a social technical prototype, which then, as the prototypes can be moved much faster. But you might take, as an NGO, take years to come to that model of the prototype. But once that model comes, and then you are able to scale it up, and then you obviously need to go sell it, talk about it. And that is how I think the fast movement can happen. So that uniqueness and that scalable prototype. And something which I want to talk later also is that scaling up and working with the state, it's not a two-way thing only. It's actually a multi-stakeholder partnership that we need to evolve, where state is also one of the partners and you are also one of the partners, but there are also many others. And we need to have a clearly defined role for each of the partners. So it's a multi-stakeholder partnership that really needs to scale up. But I think that I will talk about it little later. So this, I think, to summarize, this I will leave it here right now.
You see, the issue is like this. Partnership with government and with NGOs, I think we are focusing on livelihoods and community development here, because more of the sounds and words that I hear is around that. So far as, let's say, health or education, these are concerned, there has been an established, reasonably well established system of government giving grants to non-government organizations for a very long time, and it still continues. And that is because this area of health and education and some things of welfare nature appear to be something which the NGOs specialized, brought in, created institutions, and then the government supported. So the question, perhaps what we are addressing, is in the sphere of community development, which is an older term, and then now livelihoods, which is a more recent term. In fact, it's only in the 80s that we started hearing about more of livelihoods. In fact, even in the 80s it was rural development. Before that it was more of community development. In fact, it so happened that, for example, let's say our pre-independence day, there was a project called Nilokheri project in a place which is in Haryana near Kurukshetra. Mr. Surendra Kumar De, he was an NGO wala, and he created this Nilokheri project of community development, and then he became the rural development minister in Jawaharlal Nehru's cabinet as India gained independence. And then he said that this Nilokheri model would now be implemented across the country, and that's how the community development blocks came up. That's how, when the community development blocks happened. So it was an NGO thing which got incorporated in the government, and we know now how the community development blocks work or the mandals work. And similarly, there have been series of such interventions by people in the NGO sector who then took up positions in the government, or in some manners it happened, and then the government thought that we can do it. And then as the government said we can do it, then the question of, then why do I require NGOs also came in. In fact, in between case has been this, let's say, the MAX Act, the Mutually Aided Cooperative Societies Act. This was again from the Andhra Pradesh experience, and people did influence, and there was P.V. Narasimha Rao, at that time Prime Minister, and that's how this new act to reinvigorate and autonomize this cooperative sector came up. Similarly, the most, let's say the precursor of the National Rural Livelihoods Mission, that's this self-help groups, is a creation of the NGOs. Now, what is the self-help groups? How long that back it goes back to? There would be controversies. There would be various versions of it. In fact, if you go to Indonesia, you would find the groups of women self-help groups, women's groups, doing savings and credit actually happened in the 70s. So then in India in the 80s, NGOs started it. The government brought the Dwakra program in the early 80s. And then what happened was there was a state initiated initiative which took it to a very large scale, and that's what happened in Andhra Pradesh. And then, as it happened through a state control apparatus, the state found that we can do it, like we did the community development blocks. And that is how from Andhra Pradesh to, and there were other states like Tamil Nadu or Kerala which also did their own models, but similarly in a state handled manner, not through the, so much so in the NGOs, even though NGOs also did their, to an extent parallelly I would say. And then came Bihar, where the government found that it's not just a case that everything happens in the south and nothing happens in the north. The state can also do it in the north. So that's how the Bihar Rural Livelihoods Promotion Society came up. So the government thinks that through a state held apparatus, which is the State Rural Livelihood Mission, we would be able to have these 600 districts and 6 lakh villages, every poor person covered under self-help groups, women self-help groups, and they will spearhead the other activities. Now the question then is, where does really the NGOs come in? Even though many of these things in the sphere of livelihoods and community development really came from the NGOs practice, but the social space and the political space, people taking up, in the first case when Nilokheri came, it was the NGO person taking up a political position in the government. In the case of this National Rural Livelihood Mission, this is the bureaucracy which thought, and there is an extension motivation among the people who have been in the administrative services, and they found that there are people, the first generation leaders, the second generation leaders and third generation leaders who can lead these initiatives. So that's a current scenario, and I stop it here and we can perhaps go on discussing more on that.